So for today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I turned this NES 30 Pro Bluetooth controller into a device that supports wireless charging. By making some small modifications to it, I was able to adapt it to accept wireless recharging. A lot of devices out there come with that natively now, but there's some devices that are older or that are designed with it not to accept it because it's just not feasible for whatever reason. But I have been adding wireless receiver tags to a lot of things to make them recharge wirelessly instead of just plugging in a USB cable, because I have these pads around the house and stuff, so it's just easier to drop it on there. And I thought I would share with you guys how to do that by showing you some tips to it. And the candidate for this video is the NES 30 Pro Bluetooth controller, because it's the only thing I had on hand that I really wanted to do it to that doesn't support wireless charging. So stay tuned for the video and I'll show you exactly how I did it. So this is the wireless receiver I'm going to be adding to the NES 30 Pro controller. This one had a micro USB plug on the end of it. It was made to be universal for Android phones. I wanted it for a different project that didn't pan out, and I had it lying around and I figured why not use it for something else. And this video is to show you how easy it is, or not really how easy it is, but show you how you can add wireless charging to devices that don't natively support it. What this does is it just takes 5 volts from the transmitter, sends it wirelessly to the receiver over induction, and it outputs 5 volts through this. There's actually probably a rectifier on the inside of this tag, and it just outputs 5 volts right from this. And 5 volts is all you need for a lot of USB devices. So in theory, it could work on literally any USB device. Just trying to figure out where to put it and then running the wires in parallel with the 5 volt input on that device are what can be challenging. But it will work for almost anything. I did read some stuff on iPhones and stuff like that use metal casings that it's harder to do it with. So I'm not going to focus on that one because I don't use Apple products in general. But I think it would be fun to show you guys how to implement a wireless receiver on pretty much any device. Like I said, the hardest part is just getting it to fit, which is why I think the NES 30 Pro is the best candidate for this, because it comes with this backing on it, and it actually has like a decent amount of room on the inside of it, so the tag should hide neatly inside of there. And I've already modified this thing a lot, so what's one more modification to it? And that also kind of eliminates the need to plug it into anything. Just drop it, charge it, and go. So yeah, let's get right to it. So this works by just placing it on top of the transmitter right here. As you can see, there's a red LED lit up, but if you place the tag on top of it, it turns blue. You can't really see it because it lights, but it turns blue. That just indicates that it's passing the current. And all I'm going to do right now is just flip it over, so that way we can get a voltage reading on this thing. My meter right there. And if I remember right, should be positive. Yep, as you can see, we can get 5 volts direct current, which is what we need for any USB device. Now, what I did with this was I cut off the micro USB end, and I scraped away some of the solder mask and just applied solder to it, so that way I can run my own wires wherever I want. The goal here is to put it inside of the NES 30 Pro backing, kind of like that. That way I don't have to sacrifice covering up screws or anything. It's going to be a little hard closing it up, but I think it'll be fine. And we just put the tag on top. It'll charge just like that. But we don't have a whole lot of room to work with this tag. And also, since it's on the other side, I can't really use these solder joints that I added because I don't want to fold it over and increase more room. So I'm just going to probably cut it right there and scrape away some of the solder mask and apply solder to it. So I can show you how I did that. So let's do that real quick. So cutting these and applying solder to it is actually really easy. All I do is I just take some scissors and I just cut away at some of this ribbon cable. It's really important to make sure you know what you're cutting, because there are different varieties of these wireless tags, and you don't want to cut something that's important. These ones are pretty obvious. There's only 2 etches on the front and the back, so it's kind of obvious that's just for power, so there's no harm in cutting just that. But Apple ones might be different, so I would avoid using Apple specific ones. I'd get an Android one. This one right here only costs like $10 on eBay, and they're even cheaper on Amazon and eBay depending on where you look. It just depends on region, I guess. But they're pretty cheap to modify, and these little pads, you can get them for $5 almost anywhere now. So let's scrape away some of the solder mask on here. For that, I just used an X-Acto knife. You want to be really careful with this. You don't want to dig too deep and go through it and break the connection. So it's very important to do light passes with your blade. You don't want to dig too deep and break the connection. This one does go through both sides, so there's a lot of thickness there to kind of avoid that, but some of them don't have double-sided etches like this, so you really want to avoid too much pressure on it. And after a couple passes, it does take some time. You'll reveal some copper to solder to. Before I solder to it though, I just like to clean it up a little bit with some isopropyl alcohol. That way we get rid of all of the scrapings and whatnot. A few passes just like that, and now I'm just gonna just tin the pad. I'm not gonna run wires to it yet. I'm just gonna add some solder to it for now. Crackling sound is just the sound of the alcohol burning off. And there we go. Just like that, we have a decent amount of solder on it, and we should be fine. So let's move on. I want the pad to fit inside this half of the shell. So what I'm going to do is kind of eyeball it a bit, and that should be fine. I'm just having it like that, so that way, yep, it turns on. So that should be a good spot for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack it with some hot glue. Now these tags, when they pass current, they do get a little hot, so hot glue might not be enough, but I'm just going to see if it works for now. And if it doesn't, I'll add some epoxy, but once I close this thing up, it should be fine. It should just hold in place based on the pressure from the other half of the case, so I'm not really too worried about it. But I'm just going to add some hot glue right now just to kind of make this process a little easier. Also going to put some right here to avoid a lot of movement on this side. So right now I'm just going to solder these two very thin wires to the pad. These wires are the thinnest I could find on hand. I'm pretty sure I can find smaller ones online, but I want to work with what I have right now. It's really important to note the polarity. You don't want to get anything mixed up and then hook it up to your device and watch it break, because a lot of stuff may not have reverse polarity protection. So there's that. Now I'm just going to apply some hot glue to the wires to kind of reduce the stress on the joints. So I'm just going to put a very small amount right there, and an even smaller amount right here because a lot came out. So before we solder the wires to the controller itself, we have to find out where we can solder to. I'm going to start with the micro USB port because that's the 5-volt input we want to solder in parallel to. Odds are we're going to be able to find pins or connections on this that are a lot easier to solder to than just the pin of the micro USB connector, especially for ground because that's everywhere. But the easiest way to do this is just plug in a micro USB connection and just very carefully with your multimeter probes touch both of the pins. You want the far outside pins of this because the outside is positive and the outside is negative, so you just want to be sure what you're soldering to. And far right is the 5-volt positive and far left is the negative. So we know what to solder to now. I have my multimeter set into continuity mode, so when the two probes touch you can hear a beep, and right now I'm going to be searching for better spots to solder to rather than the micro USB pin itself. You can see the etches almost pretty clearly of where to solder to, but I'm just going to use my meter anyways just to be sure. First I'm going to look for a ground connection. That's this pin over here. Far left is ground. So ground should be a really easy spot to solder to because there's so many connections for ground that it should be somewhere on this. So let's see if we can find something. The capacitors will have a ground connection, so I could possibly solder my ground connection here, and this capacitor looks like it's also going to the positive lead, so we might be able to solder both of our connections to that capacitor. And we might be able to. We got positive on this side and negative on this side. As you can see, the positive lead is coming in right here, running to this diode, this capacitor, and the input of this chip, which might be for battery management. So that is likely where we're going to solder our wires to. So in order to run these wires, I'm going to have to leave enough length so that way I can still get at all these screw holes. I have the wires feeding through this hole right here. I don't use this hole for the screw because I lost a screw a while ago. So I'm going to feed them through that way. And this way I can just kind of open it like this to still access all the screws and stuff. So let's run the wires to the spots we found earlier, which were the 2 spots on this capacitor. So we're all soldered up, so we should be good. Let's give it a quick test. I have my pad here. I'm just going to jump right in. The battery is still disconnected, but we should see the LEDs on this thing turn up if everything went according to plan. So let's pop that down. And you can see them. They're lighting up, so that means it works. Really cool. So let's go ahead and close this whole thing up. And just like that, we are done. It is all closed up and ready to test. So let's go ahead and plop it on the pad. The pad turns on. And the controller is flashing, which means that it's charging. Really cool. It's flashing green right now, which means that I think the battery is fully charged. But yeah, that's it for today's video. It's a really simple project. I just wanted to show you guys how easy it is to, well, not really how easy it is to add wireless charging, but the basic steps to add wireless charging. You know, how to place the receiver pad and how to run the power output for it and all that fun stuff. This was probably the easiest candidate I had for it. I wanted to add it to a few other things, but this one took the cake because of the space that it had, and it would just be the simplest to go with. But it's possible for a lot of devices. You just have to find out where to put the tag. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys subscribe and stay tuned for future projects, and I will see you next time.